All right, so welcome to the third installment of the Ballantine Classic Science Fiction series that I'm doing with Richard at Vintage SF and Matt at Science Fiction Reads. And I hosted this one, so I got to choose, and I chose The Best of Fredric Brown. And we're going to discuss this book, but first, we're going to kind of, as we start each of these, we go over some questions to kind of familiarize each other with some of our styles and science fiction, knowledge. But we're going to do that again. And this question that I came up with for this episode is, what are your favorite subgenres of science fiction? And even beyond science fiction, what are some of the other kind of books or nonfiction that you like to read? And I guess we could start with Richard for this one.
Sure. Uh, I really like reading lots of science fiction, but I guess if I was picking a subgenre, it'd have to be apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic. Recently, I've really been enjoying some of the 1950s or early 1960s novels that have situations like famine or nuclear war, or plants roaming the countryside, eating people, those sort of things. Those are a lot of fun. And I also like first contact novels, and I haven't read a lot of them lately, but Childhood's End is one of my all-time favorites by Arthur C. Clarke. When it comes to other literature, I like reading graphic novels, not not superhero ones. I like sort of more literary ones. There's some very famous ones, like Mouse by Spiegelman, I think is his name, is a very famous one. And the other areas, mystery and thrillers, some popular authors. I like Michael Connelly and his Harry Bosch series, or Stephen King, primarily his non-horror, which is actually, there's quite a lot of it. I like Joe Nesbo from the Nordic countries for some mystery, those type of things.
Okay. How about you, Matt?
Favorite subgenres primarily would be hard SF and space opera, I guess. Hard SF because even though it's far-fetched sometimes, it's usually based in reality or theoretical physics, and I find that there's something extra exciting about knowing that this could take place, even if it's not our species that develops the tech and does it. I like, there's something extra fun of knowing that it could be done, kind of thing. And you learn about physics and stuff. Like you can't read a Stephen Baxter story without learning something about black holes or something crazy. And I think that's because some of the first stuff I read was hard SF, and I didn't even know what I was getting into. Actually, Alistair Reynolds was one of the first I started reading, and he blends hard SF and space opera really well. And I like space opera just for the escapism. It's just fun adventure, and when you can combine hard SF and space opera, that's super fun. Like I guess Ian M. Banks to an extent, and Reynolds, and people like that. I like cyberpunk, but I don't know why, because it's usually a bleak, it's a terrible place you wouldn't want to live in, but there's something about that aesthetic that I really like. Even though I can't help but feel most of it is kind of taken from William Gibson and a couple stories that came before, like Werner Vinge had an early kind of cyberpunkish story. And so did, the guy who wrote Hardwired, John Walter Williams or something. Yeah, and then in terms of other stuff, I used to read a lot of history, and I would if I had time, but I don't have as much time to read, and so I like to stick with fiction and kind of escape. But I love reading about history, like Mesopotamia. Early history is just, it feels like world building. Like it feels like fantasy and world building, and reading about old history is just fascinating to me. So I'd like to get back into that. And then the odd graphic novel, but also like I like old comics, especially When I was a kid, there was this cartoon I watched in Canada, Rupert Bear. But as an adult, I realized it was actually a comic book that started, well, not a comic book, a comic strip that started in the 20s. But then I think in 1936, they started releasing an annual like each year. And I started collecting those and just became obsessed. So every now and then I'm reading these old like Rupert Bear comics. This is actually the edition from 1936. So just a nostalgic read. So these days it's either science fiction or nostalgia, something that makes me feel good.
Nice.
I combine both.
Yeah.
Yep. So for me, probably post-apocalyptic, kind of like Richard. Overall, probably would be one of my favorite subgenres of science fiction. I do like the weird science fiction too, which is, not really a subgenre, but think Philip K. Dick or some of Samuel R. Delaney, and I'm finding some other authors that are kind of weird too. But the more I read, and since starting this channel, I've really broadened my reading in science fiction, and I am really leaning into the hard science fiction, kind of like what Matt said. And I think one reason I really like it is because a lot of times it seems very plausible. It's a future that could happen, take PSI out of it. We know that's not going to happen. A lot of those stories, they could be fun, but you just look at them a little different. But and I think that's to the plausibility of a good post-apocalyptic book is good. When it gets kind of mystic and supernatural, I lose a little interest, even though The Stand was probably the first post-apocalyptic book I ever read.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But but I do like it all. I think I keep trying to read more, all over the spectrum of science fiction. And then besides science fiction, I primarily do some nonfiction, whether it's like science-based, which does really help give you a good understanding for hard science fiction and other science fiction in general. In fact, I thought about doing a video about nonfiction books that can help you understand science fiction. And then I also like kind of, I guess, kind of sort of adventure or mountaineering, these really hard human struggle nonfiction books like the Shackleton Expedition and stuff like that. I really find that stuff fascinating to see what people can actually live through. It's pretty amazing. So, but I do try to, outside of nonfiction, I went through a phase where I tried to read kind of everything. Like I picked a good thriller, a good mystery, a good this and that, and tried to, get a good example of all these different subgenres to kind of expose myself to them. And it always brings me back to science fiction, mostly because, I don't know, I just love it a lot more. I connect with it better. But I do read some horror and some fantasy and just kind of regular fiction a little bit on the side, but primarily science fiction, probably like you guys. So, okay. So now with that out of the way, let's kind of just go over maybe our overall impressions of The Best of Fredric Brown. And maybe for this one, we can start with Matt. Just kind of some broad overall.
Well, he's got quite the range. I mean, a lot of these stories are not like one another. And I guess this would be my first experience maybe with flash fiction. Is that what it's called? Like really quick. Like some of these are a page long. I enjoyed probably half of it. The other half, not so much. But like I said, like quite the range. A lot of them felt like Twilight Zone episodes, which I thought was fun. And yeah, I think, like I've said in the past, this is the best way to get introduced to an author. And as I've said before, I don't think I like humor in my reading, but a couple times here I did enjoy it. He does have a lot of humor. I haven't read much humor in science fiction, especially. And I was kind of surprised that I wasn't rolling my eyes all the time. I actually did get along with most of it. So yeah, I'd say I was surprised. I went in with lower expectations than I should have had, I think. And overall, I enjoyed it.
How about you, Richard?
Well, I'm just going to glance down here because I have some things that I wrote out a little bit. I thought that he had really ingenious plotting. These stories, some of them, you might call them shorts. Every word counts when you only have perhaps 150 to 250 words in a story. And so I thought it was ingenious, surprise endings, economy of prose. And he's slick in terms of his presentation, in terms of his construction of the story as well. In this book, it's not overly thick here. I think it's just over 300 pages. I think if I counted correctly, there was 39 short stories. That tells you how many shorts there were within this book. So if you didn't like one, there's a couple more coming up. And I had fun. It was a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, I would say I've only read one other novel from Brown. I'm sure I've read some of his stuff in some anthologies without realizing it way back in the day. But I do think he is a master at the short fiction. The novel I read from him was really good too, and I saw a lot of some of his some of his tools that he used in these short fiction put on a little bit better display, where you could kind of flesh out the characters a little bit more and that kind of thing. Because in these stories, the character development is usually kind of the bottom tier. But yeah, the twists, I did like the humor. I am one that can enjoy some humor in science fiction. I like it in other fiction a little bit more, but I liked the way he came across with the humor. It wasn't quite absurdity, but it wasn't like slapstick humor. I don't know. It's almost like he has his own little brand of humor that I really liked when he threw it in occasionally. There was a couple of the longer stories that I really didn't like as much, which was kind of a bummer after finishing one of the longer ones. But overall, I would say I really enjoyed about 2/3 of these stories, and about a third of them I could have probably done without. But
Same.
Yep. It's interesting that the shorter stories seem to be the stronger stories.
Yeah. Yeah, and he had some really good endings. I also I read a few of these out loud to my wife because after finishing and they were so short, and I was going to explain it to her, and I was like, in the same amount of time I could just read this to you. So I read her probably 3 or 4 of these, and she's not really a science fiction reader. And some of these really aren't science fiction too.
Yeah.
Like definitely more the lines of Twilight Zones or mysteries or just fiction. But she really enjoyed some of them too, and really liked some of the endings. So do we want to go through maybe and talk about some of our favorites in the collection? Maybe we'll start with let's go back to Richard and talk about some of your favorites.
Sure. You're talking about short stories that you read to your wife. I actually was thinking of not reading a whole story, but this is a whole story. It's called The Answer or Answer. And just to give our our viewers an opportunity to get an idea what we're talking about, this will just take a minute. If you don't want to hear it, turn off the sound for a minute. But there are these people who are trying to put together all the computers in the entire known universe and connect them. And so a switch is connected, and all at once, all of the monster computing machines of all the populated planets in the universe, 96 billion planets, are into a super circuit that would connect them to one super calculator. I'm not sure why it's calculator. One cybernetics machine that would combine all the knowledge of all the galaxies. This story was written, I think, in 1940s or so. And so they have this computer connected, and they ask its first question: is there a God? And the computer's answer is yes. Now there is a God. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yep. That was a good one.
I'll just mention another one here because that was a super short one. Is there's one that's set just south of Tucson in Arizona. I've been to Tucson a number of times, so I could picture this one immediately. And it was called Puppet Show. And in here, there's an amazing first sentence. He says, Horror came to Cherry Belle at a little after noon on a blistering hot day in August. All of a sudden, I thought I was reading Stephen King again. And then it comes back. He explains a couple things. He goes, Horror came to Cherry Belle mounted on a burro led by an ancient, dirty, and gray-bearded desert rat of a prospector. And the horror is a 9-foot tall alien whose feet are dragging as this burro is bringing him along. This alien is supposed to come from a planet that has less gravity than ours. And so it's a story about this alien asking questions of us and trying to judge our race. But things, of course, are not as they seem to be. And it's a bit of a shell game as we kind of try to understand what this alien is getting at, and if there actually even is an alien there. And I don't want to say any more on that one. That one I'll leave for readers to find out what is going on. It's a story called Puppet Show.
And that's the one where he's one of the factors is if civilization is xenophobic. Is that the one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah, that was a
There's
good one.
That one had maybe a double twist ending too.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good one.
With those examples, I think you can see the short fiction is very much like Matt had mentioned, like a Twilight Zone type episode. There's a longer fiction one. I don't know if we'll talk about Star Mouse a little bit later on, but Star Mouse is the cover story here, and that picture is actually quite representative of the story itself, which is surprising. I was kind of wondering about that. He takes you to places where you wouldn't think you would actually believe a story could go. I think I'll leave that one. Maybe if we want to circle around to it, if no one else talks about it, we can.
Sure. I liked that one too. And it actually, it had kind of a sad ending.
Mm-hmm.
It stuck with me.
It kind of good too. I mean, he kind of relieved some of the burden off of the mouse at the end. And the one thing that I kind of didn't like about that one is how it was like written in a German.
Oh, I think it was broken Russian, wasn't it? Like
I think it was German.
Oh, was it German? Yes, it was German.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got a little annoying.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing where it was interesting at first and it got the point across, but then can you just go back to regular writing?
Yeah.
But
the funny thing was, the mouse eventually learns how to talk in this story, but it talks like the scientist with the broken German. And that in itself is funny, but it still continues that annoying dialect within the grammar.
And the mouse's name is Mitki Mouse after Mickey Mouse. And there's one funny part in the story too, where they're talking about starting a whole mouse civilization in Australia and renaming it to Mouse-Australia and renaming the town of Sydney to Disney.
Yeah.
So there was some good things in that one. Yeah.
I wonder if there was any cooperation with Disney on this story.
Yeah, I don't know. Any other you want to go over there, Richard?
To Australia?
Any other stories?
You know what? I think I'll just stay with that for now, and I might just chime in with some of the stories you guys talk about as well.
All
right. How about you, Matt?
Okay. My favorite was probably the very first, and I think it makes the most sense because it's the closest to my kind of science fiction. So it was called Arena, And what year was it? It was 1944 that this was published. And it starts kind of on the outskirts of the solar system where humanity is kind of at war with the outsiders. We don't really get a description of them, but some race from another galaxy. And our only character really is just a random pilot in a little fighter. And as he's engaging in battle with one of the enemy, he suddenly blacks out and wakes up on just this field of blue sand. Kind of like I think it's 250 meters circular, maybe an oval, enclosed, and he's naked, and he just has no idea where he is until this voice speaks to him and claims to be some sort of prior race that kind of merged into one consciousness and is just floating around the dimensions. Came across these two races at war and decided to intervene, I guess. And it's chosen our main character, I think his name was Carson, to represent humanity and one of the outsiders. And they're put in this arena, and they're going to fight to the death to decide which race wins, because according to the entity, neither race was going to win this war. They're both going to be wiped out, basically. So the entity just decides, you can fight to the death, and whoever wins, your race will survive. And these conditions that you're under are equally uncomfortable and unfamiliar for both of you. And we get a glimpse of the outsider on the other side of the arena, and it's basically like a red sphere with tentacles. And so Carson's like, okay, he picks up a rock and runs at it. Actually, it's the sphere that does that first, runs at him, bounces off of an invisible barrier. So they discover, okay, there's a barrier between us. Who's going to be smart enough to figure out how to kill the other when there's a physical barrier? And it's kind of neat to watch the two characters try to figure out how to get to the other guy. Because it turns out inorganic matter can cross, but they can't. And so, they're throwing rocks and sticks, and the alien starts building a catapult, and the other guy's like, how do I fight a catapult? But he manages to spark some rocks, light a fire, and throw it and burn the catapult down. And now they're out of stalemate again. And there's some humor in this one too, which I liked, because the guy is, he's sweating to death. He's starving. He starts losing his mind. There's these little blue lizards, and one talks to him, and he's like, what? What is going on? He just laughs at it because he thinks he's losing his mind. I guess I don't want to spoil how it ends, but it was a great ending. I liked how he solved it, and who killed who I'll leave up to the viewers to read and find out. But it was clever. It had humor that I enjoyed. It didn't go over the top. And somebody who watches my videos and comments now and then said that this was his favorite. I think he said this was his favorite short story. And so I've been meaning to get to it. And we finally chose this book to read. And sure enough, it's my favorite in the collection. So I really enjoyed that one. And then there was another really short one called Letter to a Phoenix, which is maybe 5 pages long, about a long-lived human who's just describing how there was an atomic war, and due to radiation, he somehow survived and became somewhat immortal. And as he's lived through multiple generations of humanity, he's come up with this theory that the only immortal creature in the universe is humanity, because they're insane. Other species are more sane, and so they eventually kind of grow sentient and just grow old and die out. But humanity is so insane, like they keep fighting each other, they keep setting themselves back war after war, and so humanity can never really die because of their insanity. It was weird, but I kind of liked it.
That was actually one of my favorite ones in the whole collection. And what was neat about the guy, he was like 180,000 years old, and he was awake for 46 years, and then he slept for like 23 years. And he could be killed. So while he was sleeping, he had to figure out a way to protect himself for 23 years and hope he didn't get discovered or anything.
Yeah. And he, all the lifetimes he would have lived in 180,000 years, he said he never wanted to be a leader, but sometimes he'd have to play God for a tribe of savages to, he needs them to survive for his survival. So in that scenario, he would somewhat be a leader. Other times he was just a regular citizen. He always found a way to live. He's traveled all over the galaxy and seen all these races come and go, but humanity remains because we just keep, lowering ourselves back down the ladder of technology, kind of thing. It was a little thought-provoking.
It was an interesting way of extending his life too, that a day would actually take whatever it was, 80 years, right? So he's awake for 46 years and asleep for 23 years. So that's why he was growing so old.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he did say he's not immortal. He's just incredibly long-lived because of this accident. But after his observations, he thinks humanity is the only immortal thing in the universe, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was quite neat. A lot of
for how short that was, and it was very science fiction-y compared to some of the other ones, and
I guess
and
that's why
then some of those
to me.
ideas. Yeah.
Oh yeah, tons of ideas in that one. Tons of world building just thrown at the page.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could just comment back on the one about Arena.
Oh yeah.
It's really a very much of the theme of David and Goliath fighting for your armies. So it's a real ancient type of story. I found it really interesting that he wrote it in World War II. So that kind of, for me, was an interesting context for this kind of a one battle for everything, for all things. The other thing that some of the viewers here are probably going, hey, why don't you mention this? Star Trek had an episode called Arena. And in it, there's a lot of these themes that we see here. And it's famous for introducing Kirk fighting the Gorn, a big lizard creature.
Yes.
And so Fredric Brown actually gets a credit in that screenplay because it was adapted. And it's different. There's changes in there. But he didn't write the episode, but he gets credit. And if you enjoyed that episode, the story is better and very different with a menacing red tentacled ball coming at you.
Yeah.
It
See,
was a great way to start the book.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
Another one I liked, but I don't remember it in detail, was the Come and Go Mad right near the end. The newspaper reporter has to kind of infiltrate like a mental asylum. I enjoyed it, but at the end, I kind of got lost and I wasn't exactly sure what had happened.
Me neither.
Something like Napoleon had caught on, like Napoleon from history had caught on to some secret or something, and so the powers that be kind of projected his consciousness into the future or something. I really got lost at the end, but the whole thing up until then I was really enjoying.
Yeah.
But I got lost.
I think it was a flip of expectations. It wasn't a person with amnesia. It was a person that a person from the past had got thrown into their body, and had got thrown into their body because the person of the present had actually died in the accident, was not just in amnesia.
But as an extra twist, the guy who was dying was a history buff and was obsessed with Napoleon. And so I guess the powers that be were kind of a sense of humor and put him in that guy's head, which makes it hard for Napoleon to be like, hey, no, I really am Napoleon.
There was a lot of coincidences in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel like I understood the end of a couple of these. That was one of them. But all right, guess I'll move on to mine. So a lot of the ones you guys mentioned were kind of favorites of mine. There was one called It Didn't Happen. And, Fredric Brown was also a mystery writer, and apparently he wrote mystery amazing, like even better than science fiction, a lot of people claim. So I do want to read some of his mystery, and I felt like some of these did have some mystery elements. So It Didn't Happen was like about this guy who felt like he could commit murders because of reasons. This one I don't really want to spoil. But it was just really good the way he, like Richard said, the way he weaves a tale and throws bits of information and kind of keeps you second guessing all the way up until the end. And then the surprise ending of that one was really good. I really liked that one.
Yeah, when
I
you
don't.
read enough of these in a row, you know there's going to be a twist, but often you could not tell what it was going to be,
Yeah.
which
But
was always exciting.
once you hear the ending, you go, "Oh yeah, it makes
Oh yeah,
sense
yeah,
with the structure of the story."
yeah. Duh.
Some of these were so short. After I caught the ending, I went back and just reread the whole story, and I saw all the little cookie crumbs he left and foreshadowing. And I mean, he can craft a good short story, no doubt about that. So another one that I really liked, and it's kind of for personal reasons, was there's one called Pie in the Sky, and I am going to spoil this one a little bit. I mean, these were written back in the 40s or 50s. They're very short. You can skip a couple minutes if you want, but I have a friend who hates airplane banners. Like if he sees one flying by, it just makes him so mad. And so this story, Pie in the Sky, there's these astronomers who start noticing stars start shifting in the sky. And they start trying to investigate what's going on. And then they get kind of led to a soap company. And it turns out this owner of a soap company figured out how to like change the refraction of the light coming in from space. And so he rearranged all the stars to do like an ad slogan for his soap company, basically. So I thought that was pretty funny. I got to have my buddy read this. Hopefully, I'm not gonna. Hopefully, he doesn't watch this because I don't want him to be spoiled on it. But I thought
Yeah,
that
I
one
liked
was
that
pretty
one
funny.
too.
I like that kind of humor where the whole story was the kind of the joke.
Hmm.
And while I was reading the story, I didn't think it was going to be a joke. I was going, how could this be? Like, what is he getting at here? What's happening with all these stars being moving around in different depths of space? You know, I was putting on my Hal Clement head, trying
Yeah,
to figure out scientifically what was happening.
Yeah.
and it was
Yeah.
simpler than I originally thought, because I thought, oh, how are they moving stars? But
Yeah.
it was much
Yeah,
more
and
simple.
you're like, well, what? He shifted gears from the astronomers to a soap guy, and you're like, why is he talking about a
Yeah.
soap company now? Like,
Why is this soap guy so smug?
yeah. And then the other one I want to talk about, if you've seen the hardback or book club edition, there's like a Yeti on it. I don't know if
Yeah.
any of us have it, but there was a short story called Abominable, and I don't know. I think I might spoil this one because it's
It's
another
super
good one.
short.
But it's short. Yeah, I'll just talk about it. So this lady had gone like to the Himalayas and she'd went missing, and this kind of explorer guy, I can't remember exactly what his deal was, but he decides that he's going to go out there and try to find her. And so he's out there in the Himalayas and he spots a Yeti and he shoots it. And then he kind of gets grabbed from behind and it's another Yeti. And this female Yeti explains to him that they can change people like into they can't have children, so they take humans and kind of morph them into these abominable snowmen. And the one that this guy had shot was the girl he was looking for. And then the one that had him was gonna basically make him her husband.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty good too.
Speaking of like just the humor, the very last story is called The End, and it's only 2 paragraphs. And the second paragraph is the first paragraph in reverse. And it's just
Yep.
about a scientist who claims he knows how to reverse time, and he pushes a button, and then it's the rest of the story in reverse. And it ends
Yep.
with "and the."
Yep.
I think there's about 5 or 6 time stories in here too, and
There
they're
are,
kind of
yeah.
fun. And
A lot of
he
time
sometimes
travel.
has different takes on time stories where I think if you go back in time and come forward, you know what? I'm a little confused here. There's a way that biologically you would stay the same age. Oh, well, I think it is if you were, let's say you were 60 and you went back in time, if you went back in time 40 years, you become 20 years old. Then when you come back, you're still 20 years old. so you could continue to go back in time occasionally and be immortal.
Yeah, he handled the time paradoxes in like different ways. It wasn't always the same kind of formula or whatever. So yeah, there was a few time travel ones in here.
And we're not even touching on half of the stories here. There's a lot of stories.
No, is it Giesen stacks? I think that was made into some sort of movie or something. That was the one about the dolls. There's just so many.
Oh yeah, I was a little confused at the end. Like it ends with like some horror, but I didn't exactly understand.
Well, that's the one that ended with in the car where they look at the driver, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand. Yeah, I didn't get that part
Again,
of it.
I just got lost right near the end.
Yeah.
But it was a weird one.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall, I guess if the viewers of this video, I mean, that should show you kind of the range that Richard mentioned, the twists, the imagination that Fredric Brown had was just insane. So I guess go around. Would you, let's say, would you suggest this to people? And if you would, maybe what kind of maybe comparable authors or things you could compare this to? Maybe we'll start with Matt on this one.
Well, I can't think of who I would compare this to. I remember a Clifford Simak short story that had some humor and some twists, but I can't remember what story it was. But like I said, going in, I didn't think it was going to be quite for me, but then sure enough, there was, some stories that were very much my kind of science fiction. And I found the stuff that I didn't think I'd like so much. I really didn't mind. So I'd say this is perfect for any type of science fiction fan, but also mystery, the light humor, or just if you're into short fiction or just trying flash fiction, which this was probably my first experience with. Yeah, it's totally different and was well worth checking out.
How about you, Richard?
When Matt mentioned Twilight Zone, I think this is exactly like a season of Twilight Zone with the variety of stories that they would have. But there's also this expectation of what Twilight Zone would bring you. And I always expected some tight plotting, good writing, economy of words. Things were very important in terms of the structure. And then something I didn't expect at the end, but that I could see the threads throughout the story after hearing the ending. It was just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it and the variety in it.
And like Ira said, with these, like you could read it and then you can reread it and you can see the hints and you can see where things are going, which is kind of fun. Don't really experience that all the time with different authors.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I would pretty much almost recommend this to anyone. And I would say, like, if you found this in a used bookstore, pick it up and put it on your nightstand and occasionally, read one of these really short ones, start with those and see if you like it. I've tried to write and I think I'm going to use this almost to like analyze how, like you say, that economy of prose and everything of how to, concisely write such a good story in such a short amount of time. Because if anything goes past like 500 words, I start losing interest in my own story. So I would really recommend this to almost anyone. I enjoyed it, but there's definitely going to be some misses in here for everyone. And I think I caught a lot of the misses kind of right away. So maybe if you just aren't gelling with one of these stories and it's one of the longer ones, you might be able to skip it and focus on the ones you like. Time's valuable, I guess. But yeah, so I want to also mention, so this had whatever Richard meant, I think 30 some stories.
I think I counted it about a month ago. I think it was 39 stories.
And I also have From These Ashes, the complete short fiction of Fredric Brown. And this is a Nefsa Press copy. And it's thick. It has, and it's all broken out by year. So it starts with like 1941. And all of these that we read are in here, of course. And it goes all the way through 1965. And there's just, I mean, so much more. So I'm going to slowly start picking those out, the ones that I didn't read, and probably start going through those to eventually finish all of his short fiction.
Yeah, I love those
Nespa
Nespa.
Press is the best.
Yeah, you guys introduced me to it, and I agree. That's a great press, and yeah, I think I'll keep my eye out for that one.
I have his. They have his novels too. All of his science fiction novels. I have that one as well. It's probably equally as long. I forget how many. Even his novels are, like 200 pages or less. I think most of them. So nothing too long here. All right. Well, unless anybody else has anything else, we might wrap this one up. We can move on to what we're going to read next. But if anyone had anything else to impart here.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, sounds good. So Richard is probably going to host the next one. Sounds like go round robin. And I think Richard has picked out the next selection.
So I've done a lot of talking about Astounding Magazine and editor John W. Campbell Jr. So we're going to take a look at his short fiction.
Awesome.
All right. And this one might come out, what'd you say, maybe towards the middle or end of June. Yeah.
Yep, that sounds about right. So we'll just stay tuned, and we'll make sure at each of our channels that we let you know when these videos come up.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, guys. It was a pleasure doing the third installment here and hosting it, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right.